Today we're going to be talking about the April 2025 Battle Scroll Balance Update for Age of Sigmar, because it is a little bit smaller than a lot of people were thinking it's going to be. So this is going to be one of two videos that I make. This is the overarching one that talks about everything that we saw in the Battle Scroll, and then I'll make a specific Cities of Sigmar one where I go a little bit more into my own personal thoughts for my favorite faction. So let's start off with the main stuff here. And yes, this was a smaller patch than people were expecting, but there was never actually anything that said it was going to be a major update. And so I think, well, what I personally thought based on the winter battle scroll was that it was going to be, sweeping changes with some, pretty aggressive rules changes, or points drops or increases, things like that. Cities of Sigmar, for example, got 2 entire war scroll changes, and we saw some overcorrections where Flesh Eater Courts and the ogres, specifically for monster trucks, going all like the mammoth riders, kind of became really, really popular and very powerful very quickly. So in this case, we didn't see those things. We saw very minor adjustments onto any sort of abilities or war scrolls, and really just points adjustments. And I guess that's fine, because we, at the time when we thought this update was coming, we didn't know that there were big changes planned for the General's Handbook, but now we know that. So this, and what they said in the article as well, is that the summer will be a big shakeup. Next winter, the final update of 2025 will be a big shakeup, but that the spring and the fall updates are going to be smaller updates, and maybe that's a pattern that we can look forward to going forward and be able to predict what's going to happen. Now we know. So what we do know is that because this was a smaller update, that there's going to be these bigger updates in the summer, including the new battle formations for certain factions, the new war scrolls for certain factions and units, and then also more points changes and possible updates to things as seen needed for balance purposes. And we'll just have to wait and see when that all comes out. So while we did see less change than we thought we would, we still did see significant change to certain factions, specifically to nerf them. So I'm going to give you a summary of kind of what happened. So in Slaves to Darkness specifically, we saw Be'lakor, the Chosen, the vanguard, and the Gaunt Summoner all directly affected with points increases. So these are targeted increases on the 4 biggest problem units for Slaves to Darkness, and that is going to affect your ability to list build with those units. And to be honest, it all seemed fair that it wasn't a faction that was not super fun to play against. I mean, I know in particular it was really tough for new players to play against. My game against Slaves to Darkness in the tournament that I played in was against a Chosen list, and it was really tough. It was the one game that I got completely wrecked, and I didn't feel very good about it after. As a new player, it was really hard to deal with. And so I think that kind of factored into their decision, even if the amount of 5-0s isn't as high as some other factions. Whatever, they've decided to make that decision. The other thing they did was, for the Pledge to Slaanesh, instead of a 3d6 charge for a unit, now you get to roll 3 d6s, but you only keep 2 of them. So basically you get that extra roll, and now you pick your 2 best dice to get the best charge you can possibly get. It's still really good, but it does cap the actual threat range of the unit, and I think that makes a lot of sense. If this had been the rule all along, I don't think anybody would have really questioned it or complained. It would have seemed really good that you can run a vanguard up the board or something, and then you can just never flub a charge, because even if you get up to somebody, you're basically never going to get 111s and not be able to make it in on a unit. So it's a good change, I think. But I'm curious what Slaves to Darkness players feel about this, how they're kind of dealing with this, and you can let me know in the comments. So Flesh Eater Courts was one of the biggest win rates according to multiple people that are doing stats, including Warhammer, which is where I generally see some stats every so often. And they had Morbeg Knights and Usharan get some points increases, and that made a lot of sense because they were just being spammed. The Morbeg Knights lists were really the most common list I saw, even more than Slaves of Darkness, and the fact that these Morbeg Knights could then get revived, like not even just one of them but two of them, now that's also been nerfed. So the faction rule that allows you to revive units and then even revive an extra one for the Morbeg Knights, it now goes on a 4+, and so that's going to make the recursion for them a little less consistent. Everything else that made Flesh Eater Courts good is still there, and so they still will be powerful, but it will just be a little bit tougher to spam the one unit going forward, and that's a good thing. Now, one big surprise was that Stormcast Eternals had very minor point increases and some decreases as well. The only real major nerf was that the Vanguard chamber ability that allows them to retreat or run and then still charge and shoot and stuff, it is now once per army per turn, and so you can't have a bunch of units doing this now, and that is, I think, a significant nerf. I think that's a big deal, and so that makes a lot of sense. Again, and so I actually want to give a shout out to somebody on AOS Coach Discord, Asri, who I chat with on the Cities of Sigmar Discord, and I'm sure he's on other ones too. But he basically said this about Cities of Sigmar, and I think it applies to pretty much every other army, that with these points decreases and increases, the fundamental way that you play these armies, the way that these armies are good and bad, is not changing. If something strategically worked before, it still works now. The question is, are you totally priced out of it, or do you just have to make a cut somewhere else? But overall, things aren't actually changing. The meta is not going to change that much, and there are exceptions. For example, with Slaves to Darkness, the threat range going down, that is a straight up decrease in the ability for that army, and they will get priced out a little bit now. And things like the Stormcast Eternals, that's actually a playstyle decrease because they can't be using that retreat and shoot, which is so powerful with a lot of units. Not that they were using it with tons, but either way, some of these factions, they're still going to be presenting the same issues, but just maybe with one less battle tactic unit, or one less of the spamming unit. So something to consider. The Beasts of Chaos, just Bestigors and the Shaman both went up, makes sense. For Ogres, Monster Trucks were nerfed, as all the Stone Tusks cost more points now, and so that's just a direct relation to them becoming so much more potent with the rules change that basically assured them doing some pretty good impact mortals. And otherwise, there's some little news, like Blitzbarb Seekers went up in Heathen Knights of Slaanesh. We had Croak go up in Seraphon, but not much else. And then the Turtle went up in Ideneth. The Kingbroad went up in Sons of Bahamut. And those are all units in armies that are performing well that have been increased. And so that makes a lot of sense. Every army, for the most part, that had some really powerful units saw those units go up. Even in Cities of Sigmar that has a low win percentage, they had all of their Dark Elves and Dwarves that were potent go up, and it makes sense because there's actually a bunch of 5.0s at tournaments that were using those models specifically, and they were incredibly good value. So that all makes sense. The only nerf that didn't happen that's really shocking is the Blight Kings from the Maggotkin of Nurgle. Those were untouched. In general, there's not a lot of changes in that faction, and so the question is, does that mean that Nurgle is going to fire up the meta? Or maybe there's going to be a new space created for some other players. Seraphon is something that people are predicting will be a even more powerful army, not based on any buffs, but based on other armies being buffed or nerfed. And so that means that Seraphon can then become better. But time will tell. We'll have to wait for the data to come out on this stuff. Okay, so for the second part of this video, we're going to talk about buffs And there aren't, like I said, there weren't a lot of like major buffs because it's just point decreases. And if your army wasn't doing well before, bringing more of underperforming units isn't going to necessarily make it better. Although maybe there is a critical mass of spamming that could do that. But one major thing did come through in this battle scroll, which is many factions received improved list building, specifically when you use named characters. So named characters, those unique characters, often now in most factions can bring anything from the faction. That is not a blanket like across the board all named characters, but just every faction or a lot of factions got a named character with the ability now to bring whatever they need from that faction. And there were some other little updates in different factions that allowed list building to be a little bit easier. And so that's good. Also, in terms of buffs, like we said, some factions will do better now because other factions were nerfed. If you had a really bad matchup against Slaves to Darkness, maybe you'll see less of them, and that's going to help your faction come through a little bit. But that's generally not how balance works. But you just might be, happier to see less of a certain thing. So Cruel Boys were one of the worst performing armies in the game, and they had only one discount. Some list building help, and I think that was it. It was kind of brutal, but if somebody knows Cruel Boys better than me, let me know. Lumineth also were kind of on a really big downturn since the beginning of the edition, and they had some points decreases and some serious list building help, and some people were down on this, but I think it actually looks really good because the named characters can now take any Lumineth, or some of them can now take Vanari. So for example, if you take your Hurricane, like Severith, the Spirit, or the Mountain Spirit, which are the named characters, Avlanor, they can actually take Vanari now. And by Vanari, I mean Sentinels. They can all take Sentinels. And that does actually help build a temple-specific list that can still bring screens and wardens. And like I said, you can still bring a block of 20 Sentinels really easily, which you couldn't before. You had to pay a hero tax to bring those Sentinels, and now you don't have to. And so we might see more temple lists really like focusing in on a temple, also bringing like an Enlightener and maybe a River Blades. And that would now be like something that's easier to do. It's easier to bring Dawn Riders in those lists as well, because again, you don't need to bring the Banner Blade, or you don't need to bring Lyrior or somebody like that, or like the Lord Regent from the Lumineth. We saw Ossiarch Bone Reapers get a ton of green, so lots of point discounts, and they had a big 30-point dip on the Gothisar Harvester, which like really always seemed like a really good war scroll to me, but I never see it used. And I guess part of that is because its recursion wasn't as useful with less infantry being, like less of the like their little guard guys being used. But either way, that is a big points decrease, and so we'll see if that helps them out, especially because they like to bring Nagash lists, and Nagash takes up a lot of your points. So Nighthaunt and Soulblight had minor to zero changes. Like I think Nighthaunt had a few changes, and then Soulblight had no changes, or just a few. I can't remember exactly, but both are getting new books. Soulblight's about to get their book like in a week or two, and then Nighthaunt is going to get it shortly after. So they have some hope on the horizon. But if you're a Cruel Boys player, then you know that hope can very much be fake, and you must be concerned if you're not doing well and then there wasn't too much of a shakeup. But that's a negative way to look at it. I'm a positive guy. I'd like to think that Soulblight and Nighthaunt are going to get some cool stuff in the future. And we already know from the previews this week that Soulblight for a fact is getting some pretty cool Skelly rules, and I can't wait to see the rest of those. And so Skaven had 7 different units get a points decrease. More heroes became sub-heroes that can like jump into another hero's regiment, and then lots of other heroes became more flexible with what they can bring in their regiments. So that's tons of buffs for Skaven, and I don't know Skaven well enough to predict how this will affect them, but at least it's going to be easier to build a list, and you should be able to bring some more rats, and that must be valuable to do some screening, some battle tactics, I don't know, things like that. But again, it doesn't actually fix anything that wasn't operating properly. And then we also have the Gloomspite Gits that had a lot of big point drops on specifically like Moon Clan Grots, and then the Snarlfang Jaws attacks for the Snarlfang Riders I guess it went from a 5 to a 4, I think. And so still not good, but like definitely better than it was. And finally, we had many different regiments of renown that have been decreased in points. These are the ones that we're not seeing any play, except for the Dragon Stormcast one. I have seen that one seeing play, and so I was really interested to see that that did decrease, but then a lot of the other ones decreased that have not seen any play. The one that I want to try is Norgrim's Rune Throng, which is a 10 Longbeards, 10 of the, I'm totally blanking now, but the ranged dwarf unit, and then the Rune Lord, and they get like a 5-up ward on a specific objective for the game, which is kind of cool. And so I want to try that out in Lumineth Realm Lords just for fun, because it's even cheaper now, and you can get pretty good screening units from that, as dwarves have some good saves. So that's all I have to say on the matter for the balance update. If I missed anything, feel free to share it in the comments below. Otherwise, I'm going to get to editing this video so I can start working on my Cities of Sigmar specific video. So we'll see you all in that one.